Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining Iterative Ventures series of AMAs with Zach from Zing Data today. I'm particularly interested in Zach's product because this is a pain point that I experienced myself working at Facebook in analytics back in 2015. The tool that he's building is exactly what I've always wanted, which is a mobile platform to pull up analytic charts. So then when I go into my meetings, et cetera, I have evidence to show in a very efficient way. So Zach, I'd love to, first of all, thank you for joining us in this
Thanks for having me.
podcast. Yeah, absolutely. And, Zach, we've known each other, since 2021. I'd love to dive in a little bit detail as to how did you come up with this idea? How did you get started? What was the inspiration?
Yeah, so I think whenever you're starting a company, you either get frustrated enough with something or excited enough about something that you start building. And so that's what happened here. I was in a really, really boring hour-long plus meeting where we were trying to figure out where to hire salespeople, where we had free signups, where we had paid signups. I was VP of product at a company at the time. And we all had our phones. None of us had our computers. And so we were basically having this long discussion about where we hire salespeople without the benefit of looking at the data on where our signups were and where people converted and all that. And I knew that that data existed because I built out the data warehouses and all that stuff. I'd put in the time with engineers on the team to get that infrastructure in place. But we were having a meeting and making decisions without the benefit of that. And it was like, why isn't there an easier way to use this? We had Jupyter notebooks, we had Metabase, we had all this other stuff. None of it actually worked in the lightweight, on your phone way that actually a lot of people work today. Actually, that was the motivation. And then I started kind of working on it nights and weekends with a friend of mine who had met 10 years before at MIT. We went to grad school together. Started building out the initial version, put it up on Product Hunt. And then we had like real companies sign up, like not Gmail addresses, like some of which are in like the Fortune 1000. And then we were like, okay, there's something here. And then we went out and jumped into it full time, raised a round of about $2.5 million, and started kind of really building out the team, making the product a lot better. And kind of that's where we are today. And then over time, we started as this like mobile platform where you would deterministically say, hey, I want the count of this thing grouped by that thing, and you tap through it. And then recently, over the last 3 months, with the possibilities that OpenAI and ChatGPT and other things have opened up, we said, well, actually dictating to your phone, where you're not going to do a lot of typing, is a great interface to ask questions. And so we've added in natural language querying, so you can ask a question, we'll translate it to SQL, run that query on your data, and then show you a graph or a chart or whatever it is. So it makes it way more lightweight to say, hey, who are my top 5 salespeople? Or what orders have happened but not yet been fulfilled if you're in a fulfillment center. And do that without needing to know SQL, without needing to be at a computer, in a way more lightweight way. And we have use cases that I wouldn't have even thought of. I thought it'd be used by VPs of product at Series C companies to monitor product analytics like I wanted. And we have folks in farm settings. We have folks in energy when they're deciding, what to extract or store. We have real estate agents, like this super interesting mix of use cases that kind of turned us on to the idea that there are a lot of people who are out in the world doing their work, real estate agents, retail workers, the folks who fix your utility lines if they go down, the folks who fix your roads, the folks who are in logistics and supply chains. And all of those folks actually will be able to do their job better if they have the right data on, hey, where are the outages, or which parts of the road need work, or do we have the parts to fix this thing in stock in a warehouse nearby? They all can do their jobs better if they have data. And in order to do that, you need to make it super simple and work well on mobile. And so that's what we've done. And AI is one of the ways we make that, a notch easier than has historically been the case.
That's remarkable, and the fact that you can find all these other use cases, especially outside the realm of software-driven companies, et cetera, right? For people who's on the road, on the farm, et cetera.
And it's
that's
fascinating. 80% of the world's workforce. There's some research by Emergence Capital. 80% of the world's workforce is deskless or not primarily at a desk. So especially if you go to Southeast Asia, a lot of small businesses will actually operate primarily from their mobile phones. We have a chain of retail stores in Argentina that uses Zing, and they actually have never logged in on a desktop. They added a Postgres database from an Android device, and they query and go to different stores and do that all from their phone. They've never logged in to Zing from web. And would I have forecasted that? No, I would have said, oh, most people will probably set it up on web and then use it on their phone. But there's actually folks who are literally running their business from their phone. And I think you see even recently, Stripe, I believe it was, had a thing where you can accept payments by literally tapping a card on an iPhone, and you can run a business without necessarily needing as expensive of infrastructure as you used to. And all those transactions are generating data. The question is, how do you make it useful? You might have a standalone app for Salesforce or a standalone app for Google Analytics, but the fact is a lot of the value comes from putting those things together into like a data warehouse. So you can say, hey, the person who saw this ad purchased and then purchased again, and then had this customer support question. You put that all in one place, and then you set alerts when things happen, makes business much more real time. And so the idea that we're going for is, instead of a dashboard that you go check and need to spend a bunch of time building, how do you just make it way more lightweight to ask a question? I'm sure when you were at Facebook and someone said, hey, Richard, can you go create a dashboard for this thing? Or hey, can you go do some analysis on this? Sometimes it was really hard and took your expertise, but other times you're probably like, hey, if there were really good tools and people could self-serve this would save me a lot of time. So I think we're focused on solving kind of that easier set of use cases.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that what you're creating sounds like you're about to replace my former job. So, well, I think that's super exciting that we can have this efficiency boost, and I'd love to dive into later on. Love to dive into the kind of areas that you're currently focusing on, and deepening those use cases. But before that, I'd love to dive into your personal experience, because this is a community event, and so I'd love for you to share a little bit about your experience as to when you got started. What were some of the learning experiences, pitfalls, and how you came to here, basically?
Yeah, so before I started Zing, my first job out of college, I was a management consultant. So I got very good at formatting slides and really kind of understanding how businesses work and a lot of inefficiencies in that. And realized that this desire to build stuff was missing. So from that work, right? As a consultant, you're always giving advice. You're not actually the decision maker. You're not the person building the thing. You're the person advising the people who build the stuff. And so ended up going to business school and all that stuff, and worked at Facebook on speech recognition, shipped their first work in speech recognition, actually applied to voice clips in Messenger. No longer a live feature, but it now powers captions on Newsfeed and video understanding for Newsfeed, which is super valuable. And actually ads with video captions turned on have 11% more watch time than videos that don't have captions. So turns out at Facebook scale, that's a very valuable problem to have solved. Also worked on Facebook's first work in speech recognition, and then their first mobile ads format called Canvas. I think it's called Instant Experiences. It's still there. And those sort of formative experiences in building lightweight interfaces that worked well, right? Where you didn't need to do something hard at a computer, but you could say something and get captions, or record a video and get captions, or we could rank it better because we knew what was in that video. sort of introduced me to this idea that if you can make a consumer level usable product useful for a business, that's pretty powerful. And I think, Canva has done a good job of that. Robinhood in making stock trading a step change easier and work well on mobile. Those were sort of good examples that we looked at when we were thinking through what the right experience would be to use data on mobile. And the interesting thing is, I looked around for tools that would do this. So I didn't start off saying like, oh, I need to go start a company. I started off saying, hey, I have this problem that nothing out there solves. Power BI didn't solve, ThoughtSpot didn't solve, Sigma Computing didn't solve, Metabase didn't solve, Jupyter Notebooks didn't solve. And what occurred to me was it's actually really hard to build consumer level, easy to use interfaces for data. And historically, those haven't been the overlap of people who are really smart and understand statistics and the robustness of optimizing a query so that it runs fast and all of that overlapping with people who are like, it's lightweight and easy to use and delightful and are, thinking about like Instagram level beauty or delight. That's not a huge overlap of people. And most of the industry, most of like the BI and data tools industry has been selling to data teams who are very, very, very technical. And so as a function of that, they would add more hardcore technical features. And I would liken it to Adobe Premiere or After Effects, right? These super full featured video editors versus TikTok or iMovie. And if you can create that really easy to use thing that you can use on your phone to edit a video, you're actually opening it up to way more people. And so the existing players, you can't take Final Cut Pro and have that work great on a phone, right? There's just too many features, it's too much stuff to have be lightweight. So you had to start from what's the ideal experience on mobile. And so that's actually what we did. We built mobile before we ever built support for web. And the reason was we knew that was going to be harder to solve. Like long running queries, or you lose a connection, you have an intermittent internet connection. So we solved all those pieces as part of the initial version of the app. Because if you don't solve those things, queries just time out, it doesn't work. You run a query that takes a while, iOS will kill the background process, and then you're like, oh, well, I guess I can't analyze data on mobile. If you think about those things from day one, though, you can build this experience that works well. And really thinking through, we always, my designer probably is tired of me saying this, but like, how can we make this easier? How can we make this fewer taps? How can we make this fewer steps? And that's kind of, you probably saw that a ton at Facebook, and we thought about that a lot. How do you build a product where a user doesn't need to read a manual or read the documentation if they don't want to? That was very ingrained to like building products at like Facebook or LinkedIn, where I also worked, but is less common amongst folks who are building kind of technical tools for data people. And so we tried to sort of bridge those two things when we were starting to think.
Yeah, you hit on a very good, or many very good points. Those are all pain points that I've experienced myself, right? So, one of the difficulties which justified my previous job was that, I could translate what business users wanted to a query and potentially optimize it and draw data, et cetera. And so there's definitely a learning curve there, which it seems like your product is currently solving. So with that said, how did you land on this component AI? Because, when I looked at your app, one of the things that really jumped, obviously, with the hype of Chat GPT, generative AI, et cetera, that's one thing that can bridge the gap with, the previous pain point that we talked about. So what was your journey like in discovering that?
Yeah, so we actually did not start with AI as the product. And I think the reason is nobody actually wants to buy AI as a product. They want to buy real-time data analytics. They want to buy alerts when something goes wrong. They want to buy, operational improvements or more revenue. That's what the outcome that they care about. And so we started by saying, well, what's this awesome mobile experience? And what's a really lightweight way to ask a question, that doesn't require SQL, that doesn't require a desktop, that doesn't require an analyst to do it. And I think that was valuable because it grounded us in what problem we were solving for who, instead of just being like, hey, we're going to wrap some stuff around AI. And it also gives you a fallback because sometimes OpenAI or some of the other large language models don't give you exactly what you need. They don't give you exactly the SQL code that you would need to run that would compile to answer a question. And so we actually didn't start with AI as a core component until we saw that it was actually getting good enough for us to pull in. And then we integrated with OpenAI to do the English to SQL translation. It's still in beta, but we do have folks using it. We have a steel manufacturing company using it. We have a chain of convenience stores where they want to look at what products are running out of stock. And the cool thing is it allows you to actually dictate a question in Zing, like, who are my top 5 salespeople in January? Or what products are out of stock? And you can do that without having to pre-create a dashboard, without being dependent on anybody on a data team to answer those questions. And so you're radically expanding the number of people at an organization who can use all the work that you put into building a data warehouse on a daily basis. And the fascinating thing that we've seen is literally a chain of convenience stores. I won't say their name, but you probably heard of them or bought Slurpees from them. And, in their case, it's not just like a manager who's looking at aggregated data. It's actually people throughout the organization who are able to now get their jobs done better because they're able to ask questions using natural language. So what we found when we were incorporating AI with OpenAI is actually calling their APIs is pretty easy. The hard part is, well, what if someone has a ton of tables and that's actually more than you can send to OpenAI? How do you pre-select which ones are going to be relevant if there's 100 tables? Or if someone has timestamps as an example, and OpenAI gives you back output that groups by timestamp. Well, you probably will, Richard, you'll probably catch on to this very quickly, but for timestamps and dates, if they're down to the millisecond, and you group by millisecond level data, that's actually not a graph that most business people are going to want to see. So we automatically handle that, convert it, do the right casting, realize that it's a time series, realize that that should be graphed where that is on the x-axis, because that's actually the output that you want in order to know, hey, inventory of this product dropped to 0, or sales of this thing are at a new high. And so there's a lot of stuff around the API call that you need to do both before and after to actually get a product that ends up being useful. And I think that's where there's going to be a ton of value created, because there's a number of models out there. Obviously, OpenAI has one. There's other ones. There's some open source stuff that's trying to also tackle a similar problem. But a lot of it comes down to how do you make it useful for someone? How do you put it into their workflows? If you think about Canva, right? There are other tools, or let's take Figma. I think Figma is a really good example. There are other tools you could use. There used to be a thing that was very popular called Sketch. We used to use it at Facebook pretty broadly, and it was like single player. So how do you make design multiplayer? Well, that's a thing Figma did really, really well. And it made design more useful. And so we have like app mentions and shared questions and all that kind of fun stuff. So once you ask a question, like what products are out of stock, you can tag someone and they can go take action to restock it. And so we think a lot about not just like AI in a product, but really like the job someone is trying to get done. They're trying to understand something and take action based on that. AI is a way for them to ask that question efficiently in certain cases. But there's all these other things that they need to do once they have that answer, right? Like assign it to someone to go take action, reorder a thing, dispatch someone to go do maintenance on this building where there's a critical number of complaints that there's a problem with the building. So those are all like workflows that are outside of kind of the API call to OpenAI narrowly defined.
That is super exciting. So it sounds like you are combining, from the top funnel, right? thinking about funnel, AI to pull up analytics and telling you, what's needed, what to do, alerts, etc., and then driving that down on a task level. All right, almost like Jira saying that, hey, you have to do this XYZ because of these graphs and so on and so forth, these analytics insights. That's super exciting. So you also mentioned about your product is in the beta phase, etc. What are some of the challenges with the current AI? What is it that's something that you like to see?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of folks who expect that the LLMs and ChatGPT and other stuff are immediately going to render whole categories of jobs irrelevant. I have a much more nuanced view on that, which is the models are good for what we've observed about 40% of the questions that people ask in Zing. So when people ask natural language questions on their own data, and this is their data in the field, not like idealized use cases, the actual questions people ask, they get good results, which we define as them getting a graph or a chart or whatever, which they save, something like 40% of the time. The other 60% of the time, it's not able to figure out which table or which field or the join that should happen, or sometimes OpenAI will actually give you stuff that won't run or won't compile and all that. So I think there is enthusiasm that is a little bit ahead of where the technology is today. The things I'd like to see kind of as these LLMs evolve and as text to SQL and other engines that are kind of based on those evolve is much better kind of semantic understanding and a much better social understanding. So I'll talk about those. For semantic understanding, it's sort of like, how do you understand that sales and revenue, if a user says, hey, show me revenue by region, but you actually have sales and you have state. Well, how do you actually figure out that sales and revenue are actually very close to each other in a vector space, so you can probably disambiguate in that way, and that state actually could probably be used as region, at least unless a user says, hey, I want to group it in some other way. And so there's some stuff there that does it, and there's like word to vec, and Google has vector space representations, and a lot of that underlies some of these LLMs. But I think it can be better, and I think it will be better over time, especially on a company's individual data. So it's saying, hey, in the internet as a whole, we know sales and revenue are like close concepts. Great. But at an individual company, the way you define revenue, is it revenue that is booked? Is it revenue that is actually already been paid to your company? Is it revenue over the next 12 months that's recorded in that field? And a lot of that nuance isn't understood by these models. And so if you just blindly use them, you can kind of get results that don't give you quite the precise answer. So better semantic understanding. And then the second piece that I think a lot of these models miss out on, and it's by design, but I think is a thing we think a lot about, is what is the context from your coworkers and everybody that you interact with, your history of questions, that could actually make these things work a lot better. So in Facebook world, you'd look at how many of your friends posted content that other friends liked, and if a lot of your other friends liked that content, it was somewhat likely that you would as well, and so it would show up higher in your news feed. And I think in the world of querying data and using AI to do it, there's this element of like, well, what questions your colleagues are asking, what questions they've saved that are likely going to be relevant for you. And for the most part, LLMs don't know about that because they're trained on these like very large, kind of broad public type data sets. And I think the nuance will be fine tuning those or putting overlays on those to kind of personalize them more to an individual's use case. So if you ask a question which is like, hey, at Iterative Ventures, what were our best performing investments over the last year? based on their current mark-to-market representation or whatever evaluation, that it knows what fields those are for you. Whereas if I say, hey, as an angel investor, what were my best performing investments? Maybe there's actually no answer because I don't have that data because I'm not getting investor updates or whatever it is. And so sometimes the models today will give an answer that is confident but wrong, and representing that uncertainty better and pulling in supplemental data from like your social network or your individual company is going to make it a lot better. If you think about ranking a newsfeed, if I just had a bunch of content, but I didn't know how popular it was, or I didn't know if any of your friends liked it, that ranking is going to be much less interesting to you than if I actually know your social graph, even if it's your work social graph, to use that to rank. Hey, the data scientist right next to you is looking at churn, and here's how they've defined it, and here's a query that you can build off of instead of needing to start from scratch. And I think those types of, I'll call them social overlays, will end up being a way that instead of each person asking a question from scratch, where maybe it resolves in different ways and they get different outputs, you're actually much better able to kind of standardize on, hey, this is how we define this thing. Here's this metric as it's commonly used across the organization. And the super exciting thing is, once you pull in that social information, you can start saying, what are my colleagues setting up alerts on? What are the things that they think are important? And you can actually proactively to a user say, oh, other store managers want to know when inventory is about to run out on fast selling items in their store. You're a store manager. Maybe you want to know the same thing. Click here to turn that on. And so I think it's going to become much more proactive and much more socially aware, if you will. Like it'll pull in data from your social graph rather than just being this general this general answer, right? So you could think about a question of like, is it a good financial decision to buy a house? Well, it probably depends on what your savings are. It probably depends on what region you're looking to buy a house and historically how that's going, and maybe where interest rates are going to go in the future, and maybe if you have kids or expect to have kids and need more space, whatever it is, that answer is different for different people based on their context. Whereas I think the LLMs today are trained on like relatively broad corpuses, and I think a lot of fine tuning is going to make them much more useful.
Yeah, so from what you're saying is basically that the current challenges is that it's not personalized enough, it's not fit to the context enough. Just like you said, when I was using ChatGPT, it gave out a very general answer. It seems like now that we've moved away from keyword search, Google, et cetera, and we added this layer where we can have human or natural language processing, et cetera, it's still there misses these I guess you call it social graph, knowledge graph with, let's say what's important to a business, for example. Where's your revenue generation? How do you currently evaluate your business? What's the driver, et cetera? And then fitting into, or even fitting into, let's say, internally, right? Working, et cetera. What are your coworkers thinking about? How are their ideas, can be potentially helpful to you, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to bring in deeper context to fit better with, our organization and just society in general, right? I'll open up for a question now from the audience if there's any. This is such a fascinating talk. Thank you.
Or one other thing I'll share just briefly that we've seen and is kind of a really cool outgrowth of this is once you ask these questions with OpenAI or tapping through them visually, you're then actually, in a certain sense, creating training data. So if you think about zooming out as like this system that you're asking questions, you're doing things in, the more of that you do, the more signals that you actually can generate for what proactively a user might want to know about. And so the long game here is not just that everybody has to kind of go ask questions one off, but if there is something that I'm checking every day, a particular query or like 10 times a day, and then whenever it goes up, I tag someone and ask them why. A good action item to train the system is, well, how could we automate that, right? How is that something where we can learn that you're frequently checking this thing and instead actually send that to you proactively? And so I think that's going to be a really cool direction. I see Glenn has a question in the chat. So Glenn Hastings just asked, it sounds like the 60% of failed natural language questions, it's obvious how they fail. How do you deal with answers that look right but aren't right? The uncanny valley. So what we've done, first off, we've very clearly labeled that it's beta. And in fact, the majority of queries that people do in Zing are not using natural language. They're actually this more deterministic kind of tapping and holding through stuff and querying that way. What we do is flag what the actual SQL was. So we show like, hey, you can see here's what was run as a way for people to kind of sanity check. So that's one way. We're working on exposing that in an even easier way, so you don't have to look at the SQL, and you can kind of understand visually what exactly what was run. The other thing, though, which kind of gets back to the previous point I had on like learning over time and getting labeled data, is like if you ask a question and then you slightly change how you ask the question because it didn't give you the result you want, you slightly change it again, and then you save that kind of final version you say you liked that had the right result. That actually right now doesn't feed back into the model. Over time, though, if someone else at your company has a very similar question, that should actually be probably the first draft that's run. And so it kind of goes back to like this macro optimization of how you make the system smarter over time. I don't think the system today is getting that much smarter over time. I think it will as things evolve. But Glenn, it's a great question, a tricky one. You could have a thing run and use the wrong field, and that could lead you to the wrong result. So the way we handle that is we actually let folks turn on and off different tables and fields. So you're actually constraining kind of what you can pick between in a way that's going to be more relevant. So quick example here would be maybe I have 3 different definitions of sales. I have booked sales, I have sales that where people have actually paid me, I have sales with tax, sales without tax. And when I say show me sales by representative, which of those do I mean? Well, if I only turn on one of those, or I label those very clearly, or I disambiguate and say, hey, there are 3 things that match sales or 5 things that match sales, which one do you want? That's how we think we can get from, the state of the union today to, 90+%. But that's also going to require better ways to interact with some of these LLMs or codex type technologies. There's a bit of Q&A in ChatGPT. It ends up not being super specific, though, to your own data and your own use cases, nor is it aware of kind of what has been done previously at your organization. So feeding those in as inputs would be potential ways that we can improve that.
Yeah, I really resonate with you there, Zach, especially when I'm trying to use ChatGPT to write or prototype some of the code. Right now, it still gives you a lot of wrong answers. And it sounds like, the way I look at it is kind of like this is the early machine and it's prone to breaking and it's not perfect. And so it still needs a lot of hands-on. But at the same time, I am abstracted away from having to write the query myself, write the code, et cetera. So that's where where the benefit is that it provides you this rough draft, right? But as over time, like you said, bringing in the element of social context, the broader landscape, the company, organizational level, drivers, et cetera. By bringing in those contexts is how we can refine those answers to exactly what you need, right? It sounds like.
100%. And I think the questions for Zing, the questions that someone saves, right? Those are an indication. That's a positive label. If you think about labeled training data, we don't use that today. But one of the things we're thinking about is how we can kind of inform a model based on the questions you've saved before that are reliable, that are good, even if you didn't ask those questions using natural language. Maybe you asked those questions using SQL, or a data scientist on your team did, or maybe you asked those questions deterministically by tapping through stuff. And so you now have created this saved question, this labeled training data, which we could use to inform natural language queries in the future and improve the likelihood that those return exactly what you want them to.
Wow, a lot of
I
things
think
to
one of the
think
biggest
about.
challenges if you use ChatGPT is it can be confident and wrong. And representing that uncertainty is actually pretty important. My background was in statistics. And so statisticians think a lot about uncertainty and how you represent, is this change in the data a meaningful change? And to do that, we have statistical models and all that sort of stuff to say, is this change statistically significant? And I think in the same way for LLMs, you probably want some way to say, hey, there's a level of confidence around this answer that is high or low. And maybe that's derived on how many places it's sourced from, the authority of those sources, that then would give you a different level of confidence. So for
So
instance, if you had 3 revenue fields and I spit out a result, we could say, hey, this is low confidence because there are 3 different fields that could all match. Choose a specific one, and your confidence then goes up because you've de-risked that uncertain part.
that's a really interesting thought. It sounds like you're basically giving what the model spits out a grading system, right? So instead of saying that, hey, this is either right or wrong, you're saying that, well, this, could it's kind of right, but it's not exactly entirely to the context, et cetera. So you kind of give this grading system for the model to retrain, et cetera, right, over time.
Yeah, there's some actually there's two kind of examples that come to mind. One is PageRank at Google that decided, this page is more relevant because there's a lot of sites on the internet that are high authority that are linking to it. So it's probably a relevant result, right? In a certain sense, more reliable votes decrease uncertainty or make you more certain that that's a good result. Twitter's machine learning team also has some interesting work out where they will look at a post and they'll look at, I think it's like folks with different political spectrum views. And if they realize that it's being reported as inaccurate in a way that's, I think it's consistent across political groups, that it's unlikely to be accurate because these groups disagree on, let's say, a lot of things, but they both agree that this data is, or this post or whatever is inaccurate, or should be reported. And so there's mechanisms, and there's some of them are kind of fancy, and there's a lot of math behind them, but mechanisms to say, hey, is this thing likely reliable or not, without necessarily needing to judge and know its truthfulness, but rather look at the data on people that engage with it, how they report it, given all the other ways they may differ. If there's consistency in that you can use that as a proxy for how confident you are in something. But it's actually even easier if I literally have like 3 fields with slightly different names and I'm having to guess at one of them to complete this query. Well, that's a thing I can know much more deterministically the solution for.
That's super interesting. Basically, the way I heard from you is that not only should you be considering about the utility of a Chat GPT or some of these generative AI models, but also thinking about the secondary effect. How does that relate to other participants in this network, et cetera, as well? So that's super fascinating. Any other question from the audience? And
I'll give a quick plug. If anybody wants to try this stuff out, you can try it out for free at zingdata.com. And you could do something as lightweight as hook it up to a Google Sheet. So you can try using natural language on your own Google Sheet, all the way up to big databases like Trino and Snowflake and all that kind of fun stuff. BigQuery, Amazon Redshift, all that kind of stuff. But we have a lot of folks who have a Google Sheet with, maybe their financial goal for the next year, their plan, or some people who will hook it up to data from their Apple Watch and say, hey, which day did I get the most steps in? Or they'll track data from their Nest thermostat, which show me the days that I use the most energy over the last month. And those are all lightweight ways that you can kind of play with it without needing to have like big data sources set up or even pull it into like your business use case.
That's amazing. I've been looking for solutions like this. Thanks for the plug.
Sure. Anything else, or should we call it?
Well, thank you so much, Zach. This has been such an amazing talk. I've learned so much from this, and it's been amazing. I'm going to try it out, and we should have follow-up conversations as you progress along and discovering new use cases, etc. So, thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thanks.